All right. So I've spent the last 6 years automating deployments on AWS for many different companies. And some years ago, we started down this path of creating creating a point-and-click dashboard for developers to deploy Drupal and other applications to their own AWS accounts with a few clicks. So, and then that essentially evolved into the Dev Panel control panel tool. So Dev Panel is mainly an automation platform. We use AWS. We deploy AWS architecture into customers' accounts, and then we deploy Drupal into that reference architecture. So today, we'll talk about that reference architecture that we are deploying, that serverless reference architecture that we deploy in our users' accounts. And then we'll walk you through it so that you can understand what that reference architecture is, and you can deploy it yourself. You don't need Dev Panel or anything like that. You can actually use that yourself. Go to AWS and run those scripts. And I realize that people here are some people here might be allergic to AWS. So there's these patterns that we're going to talk about can be applied to any cloud provider. So these architectural diagrams are not, they might seem complicated at first, but we'll walk you through it. So they're not that complicated. But if you actually use them, you can save up to 80% on your hosting. This is especially true for the larger, this is especially beneficial, I should say, for the larger sites that are spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for hosting their sites. So that's, we'll go, you're on.
I am Doug Van. I like to hang out with Weird Al Yankovic sometimes, as the picture shows. I play guitar, and I had long hair when I was in high school, as the picture shows. Picture of me running a spotlight for the band Chicago, also a union stagehand. Anywho, and I used to be younger. The bottom right picture shows I used to be younger. The Synaptic Blue logo is my company. I incorporated 11 years ago in Indiana, where I live. A happily married man, father of 4 kids, ranging from 21 to 26. Loving life out there. Discovered Drupal in 2007 when Drupal 5 was kind of late in life. And even then, the power amazed me. It's hilarious to think today in 2022 that Drupal 5 was awesome. It just sounds ridiculous. But it really was at the time. It was amazing. And I believed in the power. And then I discovered very shortly after, like within months of discovering Drupal, I discovered the community. I'm like, well, there you go. That's what's powering this. And this makes a lot more sense now. That Drupal wasn't a company. I didn't understand the whole thing, but clearly it makes a whole lot of sense now. And you've got my social links in there. But I didn't, no one told me when I discovered Drupal that I'd be working on, NASA and flying out to Langley Air Force Base and working on Treasury.gov and getting a federal badge for the Department of the Interior and doing crazy, awesome projects. So, I mean, Drupal has blown my mind. It's been amazing, and I love it so much. And especially love giving back, and anything I can share that makes someone's life easier, I love to do that.
Where's your CompuServe email address?
I took the CompuServe off.
Oh, no.
Fans of Doug Van who saw the previous incarnation of this session saw my CompuServe address up there. I was being funny. 75225 503, man. I was 300 baud modem on my Commodore 64, 1984.
Make the modem sound.
That's my modem sound. So serverless. This is serverless here. I mean, we got. I don't see a server, and if you don't see a server, then it must be serverless. That's what that's about. And by the way, I picked this slide and I made this slide not knowing until this morning that the after party tonight. If you're watching this, weeks from now, you missed it. But tonight, if you're in town, Tom's Watch Bar, they have robots delivering food, and that's serverless. There's no server there. So I love that. Hopefully you'll enjoy your time at Tom's Watch Bar tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. What is serverless?
All right. So when we say serverless, what do you think of? What's the first thing you think of?
I think a lot of people just think of Lambda. That's all there is, right?
Yeah. Is that what you think of? It's pretty much what you think of, right? Yeah. So everyone pretty much thinks of Lambda. But what is Lambda?
Essentially, function as a service.
And what do these functions run on, Doug?
They run on servers.
Right. So that's one of the.
Okay, thank you. Good night. I think the session's over.
We're done.
We're done.
So that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that serverless not use servers. Well, serverless uses servers. It's just servers that you don't maintain, right? So that's something that we all want to start with, is that these functions, whatever we're going to talk about, serverless, they do actually run. The stuff runs on servers, but these are not servers you're maintaining. Okay, so in this case. Lambdas are not really great for running Drupal, but there are other patterns that we can use, serverless patterns that we can use for running Drupal. And for running Drupal in a serverless manner, one of the best ways to run Drupal in a serverless manner is to use containers with managed services. So if you go to the next slide, these are some of the managed services that we can use on Amazon. And I'm using Amazon here, but other cloud providers have similar services, like ECS, their container service, EKS, their Kubernetes service. Fargate is AWS's container service, container runtime engine. And so other cloud providers have the same type of services, and you can use the same architecture there. But these are all managed services where you can run containers, and AWS manages everything for you, right? So
let me stop you there. ECS, EKS, Fargate. I think I'm going to need an advanced science, comp science degree to understanding this stuff. I have no AWS certifications at all. Can I get into these three things without fully understanding everything about them?
Yeah, you only need these certifications. So no, I'm totally kidding. So so you don't need a DevOps degree. You don't need to be certified in AWS. You don't need to know Kubernetes. What you do need is to be able to follow some directions from AWS, because what we are going to be using is this reference architecture for serverless Drupal that AWS has already published in one of their blogs. The URL right here. We'll publish the slides a little later. And then you just need to be able to follow these directions. And if you follow the directions, you should be able to launch. They have a GitHub repo, and you should be able to follow that and launch your own serverless service, essentially, for Drupal. And this is what it looks like.
No. Subnets, Auroras, Fargates. We're back into the techno battle again, and I'm totally lost. This diagram tells me this is going to be very, very difficult.
It looks difficult. It's not. So yeah, hang in there. I'll walk you. We'll walk through this.
All right.
So it is not that difficult, and we'll go through this. So okay. So let me see. Here are the benefits. Okay. Some of the benefits. The best thing that you get from serverless is that it auto scales.
But does everyone need auto scaling? I mean, is it that essential?
So if you're running if you're running a small site, you might not need auto scaling, but if you've got like fixed capacity, and if you get a spike and your site's going to crash, and this is when auto scaling comes in handy. And I'll go to the next slide. And what you're paying with most hosting arrangements and so on, what you're paying is for peak page views. So when you're paying for peak page views, that's not what you're getting all the time. You're getting some lower amount of traffic, your average page views. And everything between the peak and this average is essentially you're paying extra for that. So that's your wastage. With auto scaling, you don't have to worry about any of that. You're essentially paying for the traffic and the load that you're getting at any given moment. And your infrastructure, your website scales up and down with the traffic and the load that you're getting.
Fair enough. That makes sense. So auto scaling is nothing new. AWS didn't invent this. What are the other benefits?
So here are some of the other benefits. I'm going to let you go through this. It's fairly well known.
Okay, so no machines to maintain. We talked about it's someone else's job. Platform provides computing resources as needed. That's scaling. That's real time. Pay only for resources that you use. Similar point. Scalable on demand. Similar point. Flexibility and speed of deployments. I want to hear more about that. Extremely reliable, fully managed service. Someone else doing all the hard work. I want to hear more about that too.
Okay.
Do you have an example of any of this?
Yeah. So let me walk you through one of this case with Voice of America that we had done. They were getting this was I believe this was last year.
How big was that site? I'm sorry.
They were getting about 2 billion hits.
What?
Yeah, they were getting about 2 billion hits per month. 2 billion pages. They were serving 2 billion. I think they were serving actually 2 billion pages per month. So that's probably a typo there. And they're paying $1 million in a year in hosting for their 4 main sites, and to one of the major Drupal hosting providers.
Was management really happy about that?
They were ecstatic. No,
No.
They had 46 other sites that they wanted to move to Drupal, and there was a big backlash.
Oh no.
On that, yeah. So they wanted to see how they could reduce their cost if they went to AWS directly. So we did a experiment with them, and we put them on AWS to see how we could cut their cost, and how well we could cut their cost.
So you didn't cut features, you cut cost.
That's right. So let me. So some of the things that they wanted was the whole software development lifecycle management. So they still wanted to do their dev, test, live sites. They wanted to do tag-based deployments, and they wanted blue-green deployments with the ability to roll back. So they still wanted all these things, but they wanted to manage all of that themselves in their own AWS account.
So how much of that? How many of those features were out of the box, and how much did you have to build, custom, and develop yourself?
Most of this was out of the box with DevPanel, not with AWS. So with AWS, you get the managed services. You don't get the software development lifecycle. You don't get blue-green deployments. You don't get tag-based deployments, and so on. So DevPanel gives you the tool set to manage your Drupal sites on top of the AWS infrastructure, serverless infrastructure. So combining the two gave them the ability to essentially manage their sites on AWS themselves.
I can feel management getting a little easier and happier with that idea.
Well, if you their cost savings, we calculated their cost savings to be over 80%. So they went from $1 million a year to around $128,000 annually, and with equal traffic, we simulated the traffic. It was about equal amount of traffic and load and so on. And we worked with AWS to take the reference architecture, and we improved it, and we added things that were missing. And
sorry, I just did the math. It's actually a little closer to 90%.
Yeah, right. So it's over 80%, close to 90% in savings. And this was based on reserve and on-demand reserve pricing, meaning if they were to pay 1 to 3 years in advance for some of the components, some of the compute that they were using. So just a full disclosure there. So, and this also used some Spot instances. We'll talk about Spot later, but also used some Spot instances too. So for load testing, we stress tested the architecture under both. We did both cold starts and under load. We used multiple tools like JMeter, Siege, and AWS distributed load testing tools. And we did performance analysis using tools like Web Page Test and Lighthouse. And we essentially matched what they had in their production environment.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so auto scaling worked just as well, and we were able to scale up and down gracefully, even under extreme loads.
So here's where I have some questions. I know that the cost changes like that, but how fixed or variable are the monthly costs?
So the cost, people talk about. It's a good thing that your cost actually goes up and down, because it means you're paying exactly what you're using. So if your traffic remains in a particular band, then your cost generally remains in that band as well. So it might not be the same cost from month to month, but it's generally remains in the same band from month to month.
How do you prevent a runaway train of just somebody does a DDoS on you and now you've got a $10,000 bill?
Right. So there are tools already built into AWS that'll block DDoS, and you can use the WAF, you can use the shield, and there are things already built in protection to prevent those type of things. And you can also use the cost manager, and you can use alerts to actually alert you to overruns on bills and things like that. And you can cap your auto scaling, for example, to a certain number of servers, so that you can say, my maximum spend is going to be this, and this is where I'm going to cap the auto scaling. So
that's too sweet. I got to keep Bezos in check, man. I can't just be sending a bunch of cash.
Well, no, he
doesn't need
you don't want him to get too rich.
So on the flip side,
Too late.
too late. On the flip side, speaking of scaling, another question: can Drupal scale down to 0?
That is a good question. So stateless apps can scale down to 0. Drupal is not a stateless app, so it can scale down. It can go close to 0, but not to 0. There is one way you can scale Drupal down to 0. Well, actually, there's two ways. One, don't use it, and two, make it a static site.
We're not going to be invited back at this rate.
Well, no, I mean, when I say don't use it, you could actually make it a static site and stop your Drupal site, and you're still using what you created from Drupal as a static site. And if you're using it as a static site, then it does scale down to 0. A lot of people using Drupal 7 are actually creating static sites from Drupal 7 and using it that way. So it's just serving it from the CDN.
Sweet. So let's back it up a little bit. In more broad terms, in practical terms, how exactly does serverless Drupal work?
So let me go through this.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. So we'll walk through this. This is scaling down to 0. We're using auto scaling down to 0. And to use
one question in the chat.
Oh yeah, can you throw that us? We can't see this there.
Yeah. Can you use this as part of your dev process, because paying for testing servers is often both inflexible and almost designed to punish trying to separate work?
Yeah. So we do this in dev panel. We're using a cluster, and essentially we spin up serverless instances for dev, test, and even the live auto scaling instances. So everything, all the containers, the entire deployment is all instances are set up as serverless. You can do that as well. So you can use this architecture to deploy uh, serverless containers, and it doesn't really matter if you're setting up dev instances or you're deploying any branch essentially. So it can be any feature branch, or it can be your production, your master branch, or main branch.
Let's do a walkthrough. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
How it works and how people can set it up and run it today.
Yeah. So you can. Here is, if you want to try it yourself, you want to see how it works. There's nothing better than just trying it yourself. So you can set up a free AWS account, and you can go to this GitHub repo, and you can follow the README there, and you should be able to launch this and set that up. And here is the reference architecture. This is what you're going to be deploying, and we'll walk through this step by step. And Joel, if you get other questions, can you just point this out to us? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what they will set up for you out of the box, right? So in AWS Fargate and ECS, you're going to be running 3 Drupal containers. So your site is actually, there are 3 copies of your site running in 3 different AZs. So in one region, you've got 3 different data centers, and your site's running in 3 copies of your sites running in 3 different data centers. And they're all connected to a serverless database on the back end, right? This is their serverless Aurora RDS. And they're all connected to their EFS system, which is their Elastic File System, which is like NFS. And in the front end, your traffic is being routed using a load balancer to all these 3 different containers.
So the link on the previous page was the GitHub repo. The link on this page is the instructions at Amazon to use that repo?
Yeah, this is the original blog that they had posted that walks you through the whole implementation for Drupal on how it's set up, and the whole theory behind it and the architecture behind it. And the GitHub repo is the implementation and the code to launch that.
Got it.
Now, so this is what you get out of the box. But if you're doing it in production, okay, this is a good thing to note, that in production, a lot of people will add different components when you go to production. So you might want to add components for search. You might want to do asset management. You want to optimize this whole architecture for speed and enhance it for security. So you take that reference architecture, which gets you started, and then you want to add things to it. So for example, in DevPanel, we automatically, when we set up this infrastructure in our client's account, we automatically add a lot of components on there. But that's something you can do as well. These are all components, these are all AWS managed components that you can deploy in your account with a few clicks.
So what components are missing from the reference architecture that make it not prod ready?
Right. So these are things like you might want to add, for Drupal especially, to hold your assets, you might want to add S3 buckets. You might want to add Elasticache to run your Memcache or Redis. You might want to run Solr in some containers. You might want to add CloudFront CDN on there. Whoops. And you might want to add the WAF, which is your web application firewall, to protect your application from the, like the top 10 OWASP, top 10 attacks, and so on.
If I add these 5 things, my costs are going to go up.
Slightly, yes. So yeah, good question. Thank you.
I would make those bullet points dollar signs on that slide. I would.
Yeah.
Jeff would appreciate that.
Yeah, that's right.
So is everything on this slide serverless? Everything?
Pretty much, yeah. Let me go back to that slide. Yeah, everything here is all serverless. All of this stuff is managed by AWS, and you're not, you're not, once you set this up, you don't have to manage any servers. You don't have to maintain servers yourself.
Got it. So using reference architecture and maybe adding some components is one way to go serverless. And you've already mentioned there's more than one.
Right. It's all serverless to you.
Serverless to me.
Right. It's all serverless to you.
As far as I'm concerned.
That's right.
But what's another way?
There are other ways to go serverless. There are different serverless patterns. So what we covered so far was the first one. For most sites, you can do multi-AZ, which is running it in different data centers. That's the reference architecture, which is, we refer to it as highly available architecture. But for large mission critical sites, you can actually run it in a multi-regional architecture so that it's not just highly available, but also fault tolerant. And for smaller sites, you can convert them to static sites, use external forms and external search, and that actually makes your site super fast and super secure, because now you've got just static pages that you're serving from S3 buckets and the CDN. And this solution is actually great for the old D7 sites. So if you don't want to upgrade them to D9, or you don't want to go backdrop or whatever, you can just turn them into static sites and be done with it. So that's another option for people. If you're going the static site option, you can run these sites for as low as, you can set them up as low as 10 minutes or something, and what is it?
10 minutes.
Yeah, $1 to $3 a month. Okay, so that's
sold.
Yeah, and there are projects out there. There are tools out there like Tome, Quant CDN, and Amazon's hands-on demo or hands-on exercise to help you set up a static website.
If we can move to the fun stuff, where is CI/CD in any of this?
Right. So good question. So CI/CD, this is one of the questions we get a lot, is how do you set up a CI/CD pipeline? And it's fairly simple. You would set up a CI/CD pipeline. You create a container. It can be a Docker container, container D, whatever, right? And essentially, you're just deploying containers into this architecture. That's it. So it's fairly easy to set up a CI/CD pipeline, and you can use any of the tools that you're familiar with: Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab, Jenkins, CircleCI, whatever you want to use, Travis, whatever you use.
Are these things you can do, or are these things that DevPanel does?
No, these are things you can do yourself. I mean, the DevPanel could integrate with these things, but these are things that you can set up with the reference architecture yourself. It's very easy to do.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I got a few questions here. A lot of devs I work with use DDev, Orlando, or Doxel, etc. If we did have a DevPanel or DevPanel-like situation going on, is onboarding and plugging into an ecosystem like that, is it painless, relatively painless?
It's extending the previous slide, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just creating another layer behind, in front of that your CI/CD environment. So you can use your DDev, you can use Lando, Doxel, Docker, whatever you want to use, and then just push it into GitLab, and then from there you're just creating containers and pushing that into your production environment. That's it.
I was surprised to see this, but I'm seeing a big move to online IDEs.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's for me, but is there any barriers here?
Yeah, good point. So this is another question that we get is online IDEs, and AWS has their own online IDE. You get a browser-based IDE, and this is pretty much like you'll get VS Code. AWS has Cloud9, which I believe emulates VS Code. You can run VS Code itself. Which one does Ofer have? Gitpod?
I believe so.
Yeah, so you can run Gitpod that runs VS Code. Dev panel has an integration into VS Code as well, which is browser-based VS Code. And all these things support multiple languages, not just PHP. So you can, they all have integrated debuggers, built-in terminal, and you can do pair programming with them. You can do file revision history, integrates directly into your Git, and so on. So yeah, it's great to use serverless environments, and you can use IDEs, browser-based IDEs with them as well. So
I'm digging what you're selling, but I'm thinking about multiple remote environments. We used to all work with one single environment. Then we had dev and stage and prod and test or whatever have you. But some people have integration servers and other things, and sometimes you just want to spin up a whole separate environment just because you want to test something. Is there a lot of heavy lifting involved in just one more environment?
No, this goes back to that question earlier. You could be using Git flow or trunk-based development. Any of that, those are all supported, because all you're doing is spinning up application. You're just spinning up your Drupal application based on any of the branches from your repo. So it's all the same to your infrastructure and to your application.
So just do it.
Yeah.
To borrow a phrase. Dig it. So long term, is my organization going to potentially outgrow? So serverless is like saving the day, but then 6 months or 2 years later, that was a bad decision in retrospect.
Well, I think better questions here would be, is your current solution sustainable? Will you outgrow your current model, or is this an option for you? If this is an option for you, then you should definitely explore it.
So your point is, I'm more likely to outgrow my current solution than I would be to outgrow this one. In theory.
Well, is it either you might outgrow it, or it might not be affordable in the long run? So those are things you'd want to consider.
It comes back to cost every time, doesn't it?
Well,
just about.
Yeah, cost is one of the factors, but it can become a major factor at times.
So the choices we make can't stunt our growth. We got to have the potential to go where we want to go. And what's big right now is decoupled and progressively decoupled sites.
Yeah.
That don't tell me that we can't do that here.
No, you can. Yeah, it's a great question. So you can support any of the. Drupal is actually a stretch in the serverless environment. Serverless environments work great with Node, React, Angular, Vue, any of the these stateless applications made with these technologies. So yeah, you can definitely use this.
So here's a pain point that everybody's nodding their head on when they see this. What about access to server logs? When I've got to know what the PHP FPM logs are showing, I don't want to go through a hullabaloo or file a ticket for someone to get back to me a week later. I want to know right now. Is it possible?
Yeah. So this is a great question, and this comes up all the time. So this is what happens, right? When you're running multiple containers, your logs are being generated and stored in each of those containers. So when you go to debug it, you have to go through each of the containers and you have to look at the logs.
No
right?
sale.
Right. So what you want to do is run like a CloudWatch agent or a Splunk agent or some sort of there's in Kubernetes there's FluentBit or FluentD. They'll actually take logs from those containers and stream them into a log management service. And there's actually in Amazon and AWS there's a thing called CloudWatch that will collect, monitor, act, analyze, and look for stuff for compliance and security in all your logs as it's streaming in. And there are other tools out there like Splunk that'll actually that work with log management, that work for log management. There's the Elk Stack, you might have heard of Elk Stack, and there's many other different log. You can just Google for log management. So
it's covered.
Yeah,
and need not sweat.
And the critical thing is you want to stream. You don't want to have the logs get collected into each of the containers. You want to stream the logs out of those containers into some log management tool, so your logs are aggregated and you go to one place to look at those logs.
Nice.
Yeah.
So your example earlier was an organization that rolled their own hosting infrastructure, and it was very expensive, and you were able to come in and offer a better solution. But we have solutions sitting out there. We have Pantheon, we have Acquia, we have Platform SH, we have Amazy, and I'm sure I've forgotten a couple because there's probably some that started today. It's a growing field. How does our serverless solution compare to these out-of-the-box solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in general, with the other hosting providers, you're essentially paying. You're always paying at the maximum page for the maximum page views.
We saw a slide for that.
Right.
It was the peak, right?
Right. And then your actual traffic is generally it's much lower than the maximum page views, because the maximum page views are the peak that you're hitting at times. So with serverless, you're saving all those. You're only paying for peaks when you hit those peaks,
Makes sense.
and you're essentially saving your cost for the rest of the time.
Dig it.
Okay, I think that's it.
I asked all my questions.
Yeah.
And actually, I added a couple questions in there too.
That's right.
Different show every time. I'm still learning this, guys. You know, there's a lot going on. This man knows way too much, and every answer he gives has some techno babble going on. And I sometimes try to reverse engineer it and strip it down a little. But keep the questions coming. I'm still learning.
You're on top of it.
Yeah, I'm doing better. Our official hop-in chat monitor, Joel, is not waving a finger in the hand, or a hand in the air.
I imagine for the majority of sites, you would not want to go this route unless your cost is really the cost really seems to be the factor that would pull the trigger on managing. Because I mean, for the average, I'm just thinking about like the scale of site I typically work on. It would take a lot for me to want to go outside the realm of, the Pantheon, the Platform SH, that sort of thing. So I'm assuming it takes a certain scale of client and a certain cost point to want to go through the effort of setting up something with that sort of architecture.
Yeah, Salim, in your experience, the question was, or the observation was one that I share, that this feels like it's going to be a cost decision a lot of times versus other things. And our attendee said, for the infrastructure he has and the things he's doing, he might not be so inclined to trade in some of the features for the cost saving.
Yeah.
So what is the motivating factor for?
Yeah, that is a great question. So what to set up this infrastructure, if you're doing all the different components, you're doing search, you're doing the WAF, you're setting up everything, you're setting up the EKS cluster, your standard base infrastructure might run you $200 to $300 a month on AWS. But on that $200 to $300 a month infrastructure, you could run, 20, 30, 40 small sites. Yeah.
That changes the equation very quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you could go even 50 sites on that easily on that on $200 to $300, right? But as your sites get bigger, then essentially it auto scales up and down, right?
Yeah.
But there is, even if you're running 0 sites, right, you're still paying $200 to $300. So if you're running 2 sites, you're still paying $200 to $300, right? So that's something you want to consider. Now, the other thing that some of the dev panel users are doing, which is really interesting, and dev panel was not designed to do this originally, but some users are doing this, is that they're creating their sites on dev panel and deploying it to these cheap $5 servers. And then they can shut down their whole infrastructure that allows them to do dev test live and so on. So now they've got a bunch of production sites running on these $5 servers. It's not serverless, but they don't need serverless. They just need those tiny $5 servers, the $3 servers on Amazon that, or DigitalOcean or Linode or whatever. So they're just pushing it from serverless into into a VPS, and then they can just shut down their whole serverless infrastructure if they don't need it. So
even if you don't want to host on serverless, you can use it for your DevOps process.
yeah, exactly. So
another that's a scenario I hadn't thought of is the client that has about 100 tiny sites. That gets real expensive on something like Pantheon.
it does. We've talked to some universities that had I think one of the universities had 700 sites. And these are small sites. They're department sites and so on. And when you put it on your own AWS account, for $1,000 to $2,000, you can pretty much run all your sites in your account.
I'm not too sure how much the mic picked up everything Joel said, but
Yeah, it's a good.
it was about. Actually, can you rephrase?
Yeah, it was. I hadn't really considered the client that has 100 small sites all running on Pantheon. You're paying for each. Unless they have some secret pricing, I don't know of. You're paying for each of those separately.
Okay, so I'll repeat that back. So the observation was he hadn't considered the fact that if you had 100 sites on a Pantheon, which I love the tools on Pantheon, but if I had 100 sites on there, it would be pricey. So this would be a more preferred solution for a multi-site, because multi-site's not allowed there. And the Acquia solution for multi-site is kind of the Acquia Cloud Site Factory, which has its own cost structure going on. But so what we're determining here in real time is that if you had many dozens or 100 plus sites, you can host it on a single serverless instance. Is what you're recommending?
Yeah, you can. So you've got a cluster. You've got your own cluster. Pantheon runs a cluster. Platform SH runs a cluster. You're essentially running a cluster in your own account. And this cluster, they've got multiple clients running on that one cluster. You've got all your sites running in your cluster. So that's one of the big benefits. And the other benefit to running your own cluster is if you don't want to have your data, one of the other reasons that companies like this architecture is if you don't want to share your data with, you don't want to run it in a hosting company where your data is shared in one cluster with other clients, and you want your data in your own account on Amazon, then this is a good way to do it.
To ensure
then your data stays in your account.
To ensure that we're not beating up on our dear good friends who, probably some of which sponsored our party tonight even. I don't want to be denied.
No, it's they have their own value. I mean, they provide good service and
yeah, I mean, I've used the tools on Amazing Pantheon, Acquia, and Platform SH, and the innovation of the tools is where the value is. But I think we're concluding that if it's just a cost factor, and maybe if the tools that they have on there are not being leveraged, perhaps, then there's an opportunity there. Yeah. Love my tools.
What other questions do you have, Joe? Anything else?
I'm all set.
Okay, good to go.
We're done.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Are we doing on time?
I think we're a little over. But you're still seeing our screen, right? Because actually,
it doesn't cut you off.
Yeah. Sweet.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.